Let's get started. So, if you've been following the podcast, What's Under the Mask, you know that I've been talking about the Smiley Face Killer and the Rainy Street Ripper, the potential serial killer connection between Austin, Texas, Chicago, Illinois, Nashville, and now Boston. The reality is that a lot of these drownings, these disappearances, they look similar. And so I want to break that down. I want to talk about it in more in depth because I've been doing TikToks and shorts, which is, if you're following me on here, that's what you've been seeing. That's how you know me. But I wanted to kind of give a bigger in-depth analysis, a bigger picture of what's been going on. So let's get into it. What got me started on all of this was the Rainy Street Ripper. So in Austin, Texas, there have been a string of drownings that start as disappearances. And I'm going to kind of get into how all of these are connected and why they all look so similar. So, Rainy Street is a place in Austin, Texas, where people go down to drink. And so it's kind of a famous local area where college kids, people go down there to drink and have a good time. But the disappearances in Austin, Texas typically surround Rainy Street. They are around this area. And what they all have in common for the most part is that people go missing from this area after a night of drinking, and then they're reported missing the next day. And then a couple days or a couple weeks later, their body is found in Lady Bird Lake, which is a river slash lake that is right next to Austin, Texas. It's right next to this city area. And what people have been suspecting is that all of these strange occurrences are connected somehow. Now, the police have been reporting these as accidental drownings, but the people who live there and some of the families of the people who've gone missing, they don't agree with that assessment. So let's talk about why they might not agree with that assessment. What's been happening is that, again, these people are being found in the water after a night of drinking. And they're found in the water. Now, here's why that's bizarre. They're found in the water, and more than likely, that means after that night of drinking, they would have had to have gone down to the water, walked into it, or fallen into it, or jumped off a bridge sometime in the early morning or in the very late evening. Now, here's the deal. In Rainy Street, and probably as a part two to this, I'll do a deep dive and have a map on the board and show you what this looks like. But Rainy Street is not necessarily close to where there's entrances to the water. And not only that, but if you see this area, especially at night, there are no lights in this area. So the area where the water is, there's like a greenway, a walkway, and people will walk on that path for exercise and just as kind of like a fun activity to do. But the problem is at night, there's no lights. So it's pitch black. You cannot see anything down there. And for people who think that this is, these are just accidents, I would encourage you to go look up videos. Nowadays you can see, people who walk around with live cameras and they'll do like a tour of an area. I would encourage you to look at one for Rainy Street or even Lady Bird Lake, because like I said, there's a greenway that you can walk. And I imagine there's videos you can see of it. What's important is that more than likely, these videos are going to be shot during the day. And what that means for you is that you're getting to see what this looks like during the day, but now imagine that it's literally pitch black. You can't see anything because there is no light down there. There is no way to see in this area. And there are no cameras. And so all of these accidents, disappearances, none of them are caught on camera. Nobody is seeing when this is happening. Nobody's seeing when the bodies are going into the water or anything like that. One person named Jeff Jones on June 23rd, June of 2023, he was visiting Austin, Texas from Boston. And while he was down in Austin, Texas, he and his friends for a bachelor party went down to Rainy Street. That night, he got disconnected from his friend group. And then while out drinking, he finds himself awake at the bottom of the bridge on a ground area that's right next to the water. Why is that important? One, he doesn't remember how he got there. Two, it's right next to the water. Now, what this appears to be is that whoever pushed him or dumped him off the bridge, I think they were aiming for the water and they missed. Now, he doesn't remember anything, but he somehow manages to fall off the bridge or get pushed off the bridge. He ends up in the hospital with several broken vertebrae in his back. They had to remove his spleen. He had a lot of damage to his body, and he doesn't remember how this happened. Here's another important piece of the information. They did a toxicology screen on him, and they found rufalin in his system. Now, for those of you who don't, so with that being said, I think what we need to keep in mind is that this person was drugged. And this is one of the theories that people have in Austin, Texas, is that somebody is either stalking these people at the bars in Rainey Street, or it is somebody who works in Rainey Street, like a bartender. I think that this is a likely conclusion. But here's where things get really strange. While investigating this and while looking into this, I found that there's another string of disappearances happening in Chicago, Illinois. And it falls under the same MO. So let's talk about the MO here. The people that are going missing and finding themselves in the water are young men in their 20s and 30s for the most part. The last time they were seen was drinking the night before out on a popular drinking area. So for Austin, Texas, it was Rainey Street. And these individuals are getting disconnected from their friend group. They're being separated from everyone else, and then they find themselves in the water somehow. Now, in Chicago, the same kind of thing is happening. There's a string of disappearances / deaths that are happening. And now I will say, for you to be skeptical here, because there are disappearances that don't fit this MO in Chicago and in Austin, Texas. And to be clear, what we're talking about is that there are some people who don't fit this MO, meaning there are several women who've been found in both places, and they don't fit the MO. There was one instance in Austin, Texas, where a person ended up in the water, but it's because they were driving on the bridge and they caught a stray bullet because there was a gunfight that broke out. They caught a stray, they drove off the bridge into the water. That is excluded. That is not part of this MO. The same thing is happening in Chicago. But if you look at the list, there are a numerous amount of individuals who fit this same pattern. Young, white, Hispanic, somewhat wealthy, right? Whether it's their own wealth or family wealth, college student, and there's a suspicion of being gay, of being homosexual. Now, that's just part of this MO. That's part of what is going on here. That's not to say that all the individuals were gay that ended up in the water. Whoever's doing this, maybe they just have a specific look that they're going after, that they're seeing in somebody. We don't know. And now, after investigating Chicago, I live in Tennessee. I found that there was a case here in Tennessee, in Nashville, that fits this same MO. And if any of you have heard this, then you might know what I'm talking about. But this case is called the Riley Strain. Riley Strain was here visiting from college, drinking on Broadway, which is a very popular drinking area. And he ended up in the Cumberland River. But the same thing happened. He's 22 years old. He's white. That night while he was out drinking, he gets separated from his friend group. And then 2 weeks later, he's found in the Cumberland. And here's what's interesting about that. He's found with no pants on, his boots were not on, and no belt. Now, the conclusion here is that the force of the current is responsible for taking his clothing off. I don't believe that. I just don't. I'm not saying that he was necessarily murdered, but I find it very hard to believe that the Cumberland is not it does not have a super strong current. It is not like a rapid. You would expect clothing to come off if somebody was in a super tight rapid where there's a really strong current that's very strong and pushing your body up against stuff. That's not the case in the Cumberland. His articles of clothing were missing when he was pulled out. And here's the kicker too. There was no water found in his lungs. So forensically speaking, what that could mean is that he didn't die from drowning. But nevertheless, even with that information, he still was deemed an accidental drowning. I find this very suspect. I find this very suspicious. How can you say somebody drowned or died from a drowning when there's no water in their lungs? The conclusion to that is that you would have had to die before going into the water. And if that's the case, how did that happen? Now, again, it's anything is possible. So there could be some type of conclusion that he died from, maybe he jumped off a bridge and died on impact in the water, and that's why there's no water in his lungs. However, there are lots of the difference between Broadway, Nashville, and Riley Street in Austin, Texas. There's lots of cameras. There's lots of cameras and lots of traffic, and it's well lit. It is not like Riley Street. It is a well lit area with lots of cameras. And there are videos of Riley Street walking around Broadway that night. There's lots of that footage, but there's no footage of him going in the water. Anyways, I find that suspicious. And then you get to Boston, Massachusetts. And there's another string. I put these up here. You probably can't read them very well, but these are stories related to those disappearances. There was another one just recently. This is still happening. Now, I will say that there was a break. There was a break from all of this right after June of 2023, at least for Austin, Texas, and Chicago, Illinois. There was a break happening right after June of 23. Why is that important? Because in June of 23, that's when Jeff Jones was found alive. And I find it really strange that right after his body is found and he's found alive, and they found Rohypnol in his system, there basically isn't any more disappearances or any more drownings in Lady Bird Lake or in Chicago, at least with this same MO, after he's found. For like a whole year it stops, and then it picked up again this year. As a matter of fact, back in July, on July 5th, there was another body that was pulled out of the Lady Bird Lake. So I want all of you watching this to, think critically about this. I want you to look at the evidence, and and I'm going to do a series on this because I want to be able to get deeper into this topic so that all of you can see what I'm talking about. I want to use maps. I want to use some of these cases. But if you're interested in this topic, I want you to go ahead and just Google it, listen to my podcast, go on YouTube. There's plenty of videos talking about it. There was a particular interview that I watched with a woman who was an ex-CIA agent and an ex-FBI agent, and she wholeheartedly believes that there is a serial killer doing this, at least in Austin, Texas, and Chicago. And one other thing that I found particularly strange, at least with Chicago and Austin, Texas, is that every month from basically the year of 2022 up till June of 23, right when Jeff Jones is found alive, in that time frame, in that chunk there, almost every single month, there is an accidental drowning disappearance in both Austin, Texas, and in Chicago. And here's the real strange thing. If there's one in Austin, Texas, there's only one in Chicago that month. But if there's a month where there's two disappearances in Austin, Texas, there's also two disappearances / drownings in Chicago, Illinois. And it fits that cuff all the way down. I went and read all the news stories related to this, and I looked at all the disappearances, and I wrote down the dates from when they were found in the water. And there are a few months where nothing happens. But in the months where there is something happening, if there's only one, there's only one in the other place. But if there's two in the other place. And it is, with 100% accuracy, every single time that is happening. And I would just ask you to be critically thinking and rational. What are the odds that that's happening? What are the odds that those kinds of disappearances are happening in that frequency with that level of accuracy? You could predict, you could say, okay, well, if there was one in July of this year, then there's probably one in July of this year in Chicago, Illinois. Now, I will say that things have gotten discombobulated since June of 23, after Jeff Jones. And I say that because the last two bodies pulled out of Austin, Texas so far, to my knowledge, they've been deemed unidentified. And there have been several bodies pulled out of the Chicago River that have been deemed unidentified. I'm not sure why that is. I'm not sure why there's an issue with identifying the bodies. But so now let's get to the main point of this, okay? Is this a giant coincidence, or is this the perfect crime? Here's something to consider. Water destroys forensic evidence. It just does. The water does things to the body that make it hard to identify time of death, makes it hard to identify any DNA that might be on the body. Water is really good at ruining a lot of that stuff. So I ask you again, is this a massive coincidence, or is this the perfect crime? I don't know. We will continue to look at the evidence. I will continue to follow the case. And if you're interested in this, follow my podcast, What's Under the Mask. Follow us here on YouTube, because I will continue to update you. But I want to hear from you. Leave a comment on this video and tell me what you think.